The smell of freshly cut grass is one of those scents people call clean, nostalgic, even peaceful. It feels like summer, childhood, open windows, weekend afternoons. But to the plants releasing it, that smell is not peace. It is damage. Cells have been torn open, membranes have ruptured. Chemical fragments spill into the air, and for nearby plants, that bright green scent can be more than just smell. It can be information. Something here is being wounded. Get ready. That is the part most of us miss. We are used to thinking of plants as the quiet background of life. Beautiful, useful, sometimes dramatic in color, but fundamentally passive. A bug eats a leaf, a mower crosses a lawn, a branch gets clipped, and we assume the plant simply suffers it. No alarm, no warning, no response until it is too late. That assumption makes sense, because plants don't react in the way animals do. They don't run. They don't cry out in a voice we can hear. They don't have faces that show fear or pain. So, our brains file them away as scenery. But that stillness can be deeply misleading. Because when a plant is attacked, what looks like silence is often the beginning of a very fast, very organized chain of events. Not random chemistry, not meaningless leakage. Information moving through a living body, and sometimes beyond it, into the bodies of other plants. To understand why plants warn each other before an attack, we have to start with a more basic question. How does a plant even know it is under attack? And the answer is, more precisely than most people realize. Plants don't have brains, and they don't have neurons. It's important not to force animal language onto them. But they do have signaling systems that solve some of the same problems animal nervous systems solve. They have to detect danger, distinguish one kind of threat from another, send messages across the body, and coordinate a response. When a leaf is chewed, the damage doesn't stay local for long. Inside the plant, electrical changes and waves of calcium can move through tissues, carrying the news that something is wrong. Work from researchers like Simon Gilroy and colleagues showed that when a plant is wounded, these internal signals can travel rapidly from the injured leaf to distant parts of the plant. In simple terms, one bitten leaf can alert other leaves before they are touched. Then the hormone systems kick in. One of the most important is jasmonic acid, part of a defense pathway heavily involved in responding to chewing insects. You can think of it as part of the plant's internal alarm chemistry. It helps turn on genes linked to defense, tougher tissues, bitter compounds, toxins, and proteins that make the leaves harder for insects to digest. And here's where it gets even more remarkable. Plants are not just reacting to damage in a generic way. They can often tell the difference between different kinds of damage. Wind is not the same as teeth. A clean cut is not the same as a caterpillar feeding. Chemicals in insect saliva can help plants recognize that this is not just an injury, this is an enemy. That distinction matters because defense is expensive. A plant cannot afford to live in full combat mode all the time. Making defensive chemicals costs energy. Toughening tissues costs resources. Changing growth patterns has consequences. Every bit of effort spent on defense is effort not spent on growing taller, spreading roots, making flowers, or producing seeds. So, instead of walking around permanently armored, plants often do something smarter. They prime themselves. Priming means they don't necessarily launch every defense to the maximum right away. Instead, they shift into a state of readiness. If the attack comes, they can respond faster and harder than they otherwise would have. That head start can make a huge difference. A few hours of preparation can mean less leaf tissue lost, slower insect growth, better odds of survival. Now imagine what happens when that preparation extends beyond the attacked plant itself. Some of the alarm leaves the plant and enters the air. Damaged plants release what scientists call volatile organic compounds, which is just a technical way of saying small airborne molecules that can drift away from the site of injury. Some are part of the green smell we associate with crushed leaves and cut grass. Others belong to more specialized defense chemistry, including volatile forms related to jasmonate signaling, like methyl jasmonate. To us, these are scents. To nearby plants, they can be cues. If the blend is right, and if the receiving plant has the right receptors and physiology, those airborne chemicals can trigger changes in the neighbor. Defense genes may begin to switch on. Bitter compounds may increase. Leaves may become less appealing. Digestive inhibitors may rise. Or the plant may simply move into that primed state, ready to react faster if the attack reaches it next. So when we say plants warn each other, we do not mean they are composing messages with human intention. We mean that one plant's injury can change another plant's future behavior before that second plant is attacked. And that is not poetic metaphor. That is measurable biology. The idea sounded strange when it first entered mainstream plant science. In the early 1980s, researchers like Jack Schultz and David Rhodes helped put forward the controversial possibility that damaged plants could affect the defensive chemistry of nearby plants. Many scientists were skeptical, and honestly, that skepticism was healthy. Early results were debated. Some experiments were difficult to reproduce cleanly. The whole topic risked drifting into romantic storytelling, but the idea did not disappear. It got sharper. Researchers designed better experiments. They separated airflow. They controlled for touch. They tested real herbivores in real ecological contexts. And over time, the evidence became much harder to dismiss. One of the strongest examples came from Richard Carbon at the University of California, Davis. In field studies involving sagebrush and wild tobacco, damage to sagebrush changed what happened to nearby tobacco plants. Tobacco growing near experimentally clipped sagebrush suffered less herbivore damage than tobacco near unclipped controls. In plain language, one plant's trouble improved another plant's preparedness. That is a profound shift in how we interpret an ordinary scene. A damaged plant is not just a victim. A nearby plant is not just a bystander. There is a flow of information between them. And the deeper question is why evolution would allow that to happen. Why would a plant release information that could help another plant survive? The answer is more subtle than simple generosity. Sometimes what looks like a warning may not have evolved as a message at all. It may begin as an unavoidable byproduct of damage, or as chemistry the plant is producing for its own defense. But if a nearby plant can detect that chemistry and use it to prepare, natural selection can favor the listener. In that sense, some plant communication may be more like eavesdropping. That distinction matters, because it keeps us scientifically honest. Not every signal has to be intentional in a human sense to be useful. If your neighbor hears the smoke alarm in your apartment and gets out before the fire spreads, information has still moved, even if the alarm was not designed for them specifically. Plants can work like that too. In other cases, the sender may gain something as well. If the warning reaches nearby leaves on the same plant, that is obviously beneficial. If it reaches close relatives growing nearby, shared genes may benefit. If it changes the local chemistry of a community in a way that slows herbivores or recruits predators, the attacked plant may indirectly improve its own chances too. And that last part opens another layer of this story. Plant warning chemicals do not speak only to other plants. Some of those same airborne compounds also speak to insects. A plant under attack can release volatiles that attract the enemies of the herbivore feeding on it. In some systems, caterpillar-damaged plants release scents that draw in parasitic wasps, turning the attacker into a target. So, the chemical cloud around a wounded plant is not just an alarm. It is more like an emergency broadcast with multiple audiences. Other leaves, neighboring plants, predators, parasites, and sometimes even the insects doing the eating. That changes the emotional meaning of what we are looking at. What seems passive is often strategic. What seems silent is often broadcasting. What seems helpless is often actively shaping the battlefield. And air is only part of the story. Beneath the soil, plants are also exchanging information through roots and microbial partnerships. Roots release compounds into the ground when plants are stressed. They alter the chemistry of the soil around them. And in many ecosystems, roots are linked by mycorrhizal fungi, which form intimate associations with plants, and can connect one root system to another. This is where people often jump too quickly into fantasy, so it's worth slowing down. There is no evidence that plants are having conversations underground the way humans text each other. But there is growing evidence that shared fungal networks and root zone chemistry can carry biologically meaningful signals in some cases. Experiments in species like tomato and broadbean have suggested that plants connected through mycorrhizal networks can receive warning-related information and shift their defenses after a neighbor is attacked. Scientists still debate how widespread, how strong, and how universal these underground effects are. That debate is a good thing. It means the field is trying to stay rigorous. But even with that caution in place, one point is clear: soil is not silent. It can function as a medium through which stress, defense, and risk are distributed across a community. And now we arrive at the part of this story that feels almost psychological. Why is this still hard for us to see? Because human beings are biased toward a very narrow definition of behavior. We notice eyes, we notice cries, we notice speed, we notice faces changing expression. We equate movement with agency and sound with communication. Plants violate almost all of those expectations. Their lives are slower. Their signals are chemical. Their responses may unfold across minutes, hours, or days. Their decisions are distributed across tissues rather than centralized in a brain. So we mistake unfamiliarity for absence. We call them passive, when what we really mean is that they are active in a language we were never taught to hear. From a neurobiology point of view, when that is part of what makes plants so fascinating. They solve brain-like problems without brains. They sense, they integrate, they prioritize, they remember prior stress in the form of primed responses. They adjust future behavior based on current information. Some scientists are comfortable calling parts of this plant cognition. Others think that term carries too much human baggage. Fair enough. But whatever words we choose, a plant that detects an attack, distinguishes likely causes, alerts other tissues, changes its chemistry, and influences neighboring plants is doing something far richer than simply existing. It is participating. And there is a warning inside. That insight, too. These signaling systems evolved in living communities, not in isolation. The success of a plant warning signal depends on chemistry, distance, weather, a neighboring species, microbes, airflow, and timing. It depends on the integrity of the environment around the plant. Air pollution can interfere with volatile signals by breaking down some of those airborne molecules before they travel very far. Soil disturbance can disrupt fungal connections and microbial communities. Simplified landscapes can reduce the dense, local ecological context in which these warning cues make sense and have consequences. That doesn't mean plant communication suddenly stops the moment an ecosystem is stressed. Nature is not that fragile. But it does mean resilience can fray at the level of signals, not just at the level of species. And that matters, because warning buys time. Time changes damage. Damage changes growth. Growth changes reproduction, and reproduction changes what survives into the next generation. Scale that up across a meadow, a forest edge, a field, or even a city park, and plant warning behavior stops looking like a quirky side note. It becomes part of how ecosystems absorb pressure. So the next time you smell cut grass, or crushed tomato leaves, or a sharp green scent after pruning a branch, there is another way to read that moment. Not just fragrance. Signal. Not just broken tissue, a chemical event with consequences. Somewhere, receptors are picking it up. Somewhere, genes are shifting. Somewhere, an untouched plant nearby is changing because another plant was harmed first. That untouched plant is not calm. It is listening. Not with ears, but with receptors. not with thoughts, but with physiology shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolution, not with words, but with chemistry. And maybe that is the deepest reframe of all. The ordinary plant moments we overlook are often not ordinary at all. A leaf being eaten is not merely loss. It is information entering a network of living bodies. A scent in the air is not always just a smell. It can be warning, defense, preparation, and ecological memory unfolding in real time. Once you see that, a garden changes, a hedgerow changes. A patch of weeds in a sidewalk crack changes. They stop looking like separate, silent objects, and start looking more like a community of organisms, constantly reading risk, adjusting strategy, and surviving together in ways that are easy to miss if all you trust is movement and noise. That does not make plants human. It makes them something else. Something quieter, something stranger, and in many ways, something more impressive than we were taught to notice. If you've ever noticed a plant's scent get stronger after pruning, or a patch of plants that seemed to react almost as one, tell me about it in the comments. And if you want more science-backed stories that reveal the hidden behavior of ordinary plants, subscribe. Because once you realize plants warn each other, it becomes very hard to see the living world as silent ever again.